Hello everyone and welcome back to our channel. My name is Anda Malescu and I am the owner of Malescu Law, a law firm based in Miami, Florida, specializing in business, corporate and US immigration. We can assist you with all your immigration needs regardless of where you are currently located or where you plan to go in the United States. Today we are going to speak about our recent success story: 2 E-2 visas approved for UK nationals at the US Consulate in Switzerland for the investor and their key employee. But before we get started, please subscribe to our channel by clicking the bell button or the subscribe button. Recently, we had 2 E-2 visas approved simultaneously at the US Consulate in Switzerland. One E-2 visa is for the E-2 investor and the other E-2 visa is for their key employee in order to come to the United States and manage the US operations. Both the E-2 investor and their key employee are UK nationals, and their visas were approved for 5 years, the maximum period allowed under the treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom. No request for additional evidence was made in this case, so the company was not asked by the consulate to provide additional documentation prior to the interview, in addition to what was already submitted to the consulate at the time of application. Now, in this case, the company is actually a multinational company operating gyms in Europe and Asia and expanding to the United States. Because the investor wanted to send their key employee to manage full-time the US operations, they decided to apply for the E-2 investor visa and the E-2 employee visa for their key employee to come on a managerial position in the United States to manage the US expansion and manage also the US operations of their multinational company, while the investor will not be staying in the United States full time, but at the same time, every time they come into the United States, they have a visa that allows them to work and manage the operations as a chief executive. In this video, we will also discuss the highlights of the E-2 investor case, as well as the highlights for the E-2 employee visa case to bring the key employee to the United States. The specifics of this E-2 investor visa case are: 1. The investor invested approximately $250,000 in the US business through a combination of direct and indirect investments through a group of companies that the investor owns. So the investor invested directly in the US business, but also through companies that the investor owns. 2. The funds were allocated to launching gyms in the state of Florida and obtaining all the licenses and permits required to operate the gyms in the state of Florida. We have directly assisted with securing the Florida gym license, which is known as Health Studio license, but also all the local permits and licenses required to operate the gyms. 3. Fast processing. The total processing time for obtaining the E-2 investor visa was 2 months at the US Consulate in Switzerland. That is from the time we submitted the application and until the investor had an interview and the visa was approved. And finally, maximum validity. The E-2 investor visa was approved for the maximum amount of time, and that is 5 years. So the E2 visa has a 5-year validity for this E2 investor from the United Kingdom, which is the maximum allowed under the treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom. The specifics of this E2 employee visa case are: 1. The approved E2 employee will come to the United States to serve as general manager of the U.S. operations, a position that falls under the executive manager category under the E2 visa regulations for employees of E2 investors and E2 companies. 2. Maximum validity. The E2 visa for the employee was approved for 5 years, the maximum period allowed under the treaty between the United States and the United Kingdom, despite the fact that this visa was processed at the U.S. Consulate in Switzerland. 3. Citizenship. Both the company, the E2 company and the E2 employee have the same citizenship, then that is the United Kingdom. So both the company through the investor and the E2 employee have UK passports. And finally, 4, for a streamlined process, the E2 investor visa case and the E2 employee visa case were interviewed at the same time. So at the US Consulate in Switzerland, both the investor and employee were interviewed at the same time together, and their visas were approved at the same time. So it was a joint interview. These are all the highlights for these specific success stories. However, before we conclude this video, I want to remind everyone about the E2 visa. The E2 visa is a non-immigrant visa that allows citizens of treaty countries, of E2 treaty countries, to come, live and work in the United States by making an investment in a US business. You can start a business, you can buy a business, or you can do a franchise, and you can also bring executive manager or specialized knowledge employees to the United States that have essential skills for running the US operations, as long as they have the same citizenship as the investor. You can also, with an E2 investor visa or an E2 employee visa, you can bring your spouse and unmarried children under the age of 21 to the United States on the E2 visa, and the spouse has unrestricted right to work in the United States. However, those of you who will be coming on an E2 investor visa or the E2 employee visa and are the principal applicants, then you can only work for the E2 business and what the US government has approved. But your spouses that are coming on an E2 dependent visa, they can work without any restrictions in the United States. This is all for today. Thank you so much for watching. Please subscribe to our channel, and if you need to get in touch with us, you have our contact information in this video and below this video. We will see you soon. Bye.